Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources Podcast, the BERcast. We are back for a December 2025 episode focused on the 2025 New York State Energy Conservation Construction Code and its change here that just recently happened where the all-electric fossil fuel ban provisions have actually been delayed. And that's a big deal because it was the first of its kind, a state outright banning fossil fuels from new construction in the built environment. And we're here to talk about the implications of both the new code as well as what an all-electric code might have looked like and could still look like if it passes through the legal challenges here later in 2026. I have two esteemed HERS Rater colleagues here. We have Tony Locascio representing the kind of northern region of New York State, someone who's maybe a little bit further away from big city politics down there in New York City, maybe close to Albany, but still far enough away where we're going to get the view of how the real people and the regular home builders of the rest of the state might feel about this. And then we have Michael Caruso with Energy Testing Services based on Long Island, New York. Don't tell him that he's from New York City, one of the only regions of climate zone 4 in the state of New York. And so we have downstate and upstate. Honestly, we don't really have any kind of wonky wonk, greeny weenies on here. We did have one in Anthony Tony Lisanti, but unfortunately his internet connection stalled out on him and we decided to go it alone. So I'm going to play the role of my good buddy Anthony Tony Lisanti here. And jumping right into the episode, we're going to talk about what's the big deal. The big deal here is that, let's start with the code. New York State has a new energy code coming up, the 2025 code. Ironic, they called it the 2025 code when it's going to go into effect in 2026, but that's all good. It is a brand spanking new version of the ECCC, and the value of this upcoming code is it's a pretty big jump. It's based off of the 2024 IECC, which, if you've listened to recent episodes, the 2024 IECC, it was meant to be close to 10% better than the 2021, and the 2021 was solid 15% better than the 2018. So New York State's existing energy code is based on the 2018 code, making the 2024 prospectively maybe somewhere in the 15%, probably better than what we might get out of a 2018 compliant building. And so we're going to go into kind of all the nerdy details about what that looks like for those who don't know. But the bigger deal here is that there was supposed to be, as part of the law for enacting the new energy code, the legislature tacked on a electrification provision, or rather a fossil fuel ban that was supposed to apply to buildings 7 stories and under, beginning with this brand new energy code. And so basically every building, doesn't matter if it's a slab on grade 1,000 square foot Habitat for Humanity home in Poughkeepsie, or if it was a 7-story mid-rise construction in, let's see, not New York City, because New York City has its own code, outside of New York City, rather. Basically, all those buildings were supposed to be all electric. No gas boilers, no gas furnaces, no gas water heaters, no gas stoves or ovens. Basically, a complete change of how we approach residential construction. And for a lot of you, you'll say, hey, look, we already know how to get electrification right. We have good quality heat pumps out there that can handle cold temperatures, even in New York State that gets up to really cold climate zone 6. And that may be true, but the reality is that New York State has been one of the areas of the country that's been most affected by rising cost of electricity. Looking at this map that comes from EIA data, the U.S. Energy Information Agency, basically, aside from California and Pennsylvania, New York State has been at the top, perhaps Maine too. They don't have the numbers plugged in for there, but regardless, a pretty big rise in electrical costs, almost 50% in a mere 5 years for electrical costs. So because of that, the governor basically has worked with the legislature to pause the implementation of the All Electric Buildings Act pending a lawsuit that has already been filed, and it basically going through the determination by a circuit court of appeals. It is conjectured that the ruling might not come out until fall 2026. This kind of catches you all up here on what the table stakes are and why it matters. I had our good buddy on the BERcast, Anthony Tony Lasanti, on just about 2 years ago, almost to the week, to talk about this all electric law and the implications. And Tony, having been a former kind of utility worker, in addition to an energy engineer, in addition to a HERS rater, had a lot of interesting things to say about the grid's ability to be able to handle an all electric future in New York State. And I'm sure we all know that the way that we are doing business in this country is changing. There's a lot more data centers that are demanding significant quantities of electricity more and more than ever before as well. And so it's interesting this is being delayed. Anyways, I've got a couple HERS raters on just to hear from their perspective. What are they hearing localized? What's been the word out there about the new energy code? But more importantly, what was the word about this fossil fuel ban? And let's talk through, if in fact it does go through here later in 2026, what does that look like in reality in their area? So, Michael Caruso, I wanted you on here. Again, you're a fairly active HERS rater on Long Island, which, if you've never been to Long Island, it's like its own state in some ways. It's very much very close to New York City, but very different in terms of sort of politics and culture compared to New York City or even the Hudson Valley in many ways. And I wanted you on here because you had a really good website write up about the upcoming code and basically what the implications were. And Mike, just maybe tell us real quick about yourself and about ETS, and then just what you're hearing about the new code. And do you think that the state is prepared?
Thanks, Chris, and thank you for having me. I look to you as a mentor since I started in the industry, and I appreciate all that you do for us and HERS raters across the board, especially everybody in the Bear. The being prepared for this change has come with a lot of preparation, not only with the code changing as far as insulation values, mechanical systems, minimum efficiencies that are going to be brought up to speed, but the All Electrification Act, like you said, even with the delay of the law that now is in limbo, I'm still trying to forecast, see what's going on, to make sure that we prepare our clients for these changes. And a lot of the clients that we have are resistive. A lot of them, people don't like change generally. I have some guys that say it is what it is, we'll get through it. And then other guys throw their arms in the air and stamp their feet. Now, I do believe that it's a challenge and it's going to be a challenge, but I think with due diligence, we'll get through it. Also, just background of me, I skipped over that part, like you said. I started in the HVAC industry out of high school. I worked in the field for a few years as an apprentice. I worked with some really great companies. And then from transitioning out of HVAC school and being in the field, my mentor, my previous mentor, he's still my mentor, Rob Delfino, brought me on board. He was a family friend, and he said, "Hey, Mike, you want to learn a new business?" I said, "Yeah, sure." When he told me the first thing about a blower door, I thought it was the door to the air handler. So I was like, okay, yeah, blower door, I got this. And he opened my eyes to a whole new world. And I worked for Rob for about 5 years before purchasing his business from him. And I've taken the torch, and I'm proud to hold the torch since, because he started and created a really great foundation. And he's still a resource of mine that I lean to and turn to whenever I have questions, and couldn't be more thankful for him.
Yep, good old Robert Delfino, longtime colleague of mine in BER, and he's nearing retirement, but it's good that he's passing the torch to the next generation. But yeah, take a look at this website and this workup you have here. It's pretty comprehensive. It really, I think, outlines the kind of the table stakes, I think, of what the new code would look like. Pretty decent improvement in window performance, dropping down to that from that 0.3 level, saving about 10% on windows from a prescriptive basis. Attics being an R49 all around. But I'd say the biggest one here is this wood frame walls having to be, from a prescriptive basis, either R30 cavity, which can only really be done really with a 2x6 full of high density foam, or potentially a 2x8 construction, or some type of maybe double stud configuration, or a R20 plus 5 continuous, R13 plus 10 continuous, or R20 continuous. Now, these are all prescriptive values. They're not necessarily what you have to meet absolutely. There is the what was called the UA trade-off. Now it's called the thermal conductance trade-off, but still the same idea behind that. And there's also, as you mentioned here in your briefing, there are other options. There's the R405 simulated performance alternative. It's a cost compliance or energy savings compliance methodology. It's similar to the ERI or HERS method, but it's a little bit different. And then we have ERI and HERS as options as well. I don't know, Mike, taking a look at it and knowing your marketplace, is there a path you think you're going to be pushing your builders towards or leaning towards, the best that you know of at this point? It's a little bit tricky because there's not yet been any software released specifically that has a 2025 New York State based compliance pathway. So neither Ecotrope nor REMRate or any of the softwares have released a New York State specific version for this new code. But I don't know, just thinking about it thus far, is there an area that you would push most of your builders to? Do you think you'd go prescriptive, performance, or ERI HERS?
Yeah, so in the past, we've always used prescriptive. That was always our bread and butter. And that is I think, a very straightforward method to follow with a checklist and meeting the minimum requirements or maximum requirements. Like you said, with our software, our modeling programs not having the ability to exactly dial in, do the New York State code yet, it's more projections that I'm trying right now. So what I've done is I've taken some projects that we've had worked on and started just modeling scenarios, seeing what kind of upgrades could be made so that way we can meet them. Because in Ecotrope, we do have the IECC tab that will...
Yep.
2020, yeah, exactly. The 2024 IECC that gives us our at least close benchmark.
Pretty
so
close.
I've been playing around
I
with
think the one thing is that New York State strengthened the fenestration U factor in climate zone 4. So it kind of stinks for you being in climate zone 4. You don't really have the software to do the full comparison. But yeah, you can get pretty close to knowing where you need to be, though, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've been trying to model scenarios that way to try to prepare the builders and prepare our clients for the coming times. And like you also asked about performance compliance methods, the certain townships only require us or will only allow us to use one compliance method. Out on the East End is very restrictive to the ERI. So that's going to have its own set of challenges. There's not much leeway.
Yeah, and a lot of towns out there tend to set their own score targets. Is that still happening in modern day? And are they still pretty aggressively lower HERS score targets?
Correct. Still setting their own marks, whether it's town of East Hampton, town of Southampton. I believe they do it with good intention, trying to make sure that these homes stand for a while. And there's some very large homes out there, so they want to make sure they're not so taxing on utilities and all that. But yeah, no, still in effect and still aggressive.
So Tony Lucasio, thank you for joining the BERcast. You and I don't really have very much familiarity with each other, but my understanding was that you're based up there in, what is it, like Glens Falls kind of area, north of Albany? Is that correct?
Yes, Queensberry.
Yeah. Okay. I know the area decently, actually, surprisingly. Fun fact that I think most people wouldn't know, but BER was incorporated in the state of New York. When we got BER off the ground way back in 2010, Uriah Special, my business partner, actually was in the process of moving up to the Adirondack Mountains with his family. And so we actually had a third business partner too at BER, a former head of an organization called the Building Performance Contractors Association of New York, BPCA. I think they're still around, but at that time, Ed Voyevich was a former executive director of BPCA. Anyways, Uriah had met him at a conference and said, "Hey, I'm moving back up to New York. What's the game up there?" And so Ed was instrumental in helping BER get founded in the state of New York. And yeah, for the first year, we had three business partners. Your good buddy, Chris Mack, I was a junior business partner of BER because I was a junior. I was 24 years old. So I had to earn my stripes, earn my keep in order to prove my worth. And I think I did all right, ultimately, by good old Uriah for bringing me on board, because here it is 15 years later, and we've done pretty well for ourselves as a provider. But anyways, long story short, I spent a decent amount of time up there at the homestead of the Special family up there in Minerva, New York, in the Adirondacks. And boy, if you've never been up the Adirondacks, I highly recommend it. It is beautiful. It is cold, though. And what I'm interested to having Tony on here is because I think electrification and the virtue of it. Let's talk about it. What's the idea? The idea is that if we make buildings all electric, then when the grid is perfectly clean, 100% powered by renewable energy, wind and solar and hydro power, that basically those BTUs are going to be free and clean BTUs. And I think that we could all agree there's probably a little bit more to it than just that. But compared to coal and natural gas, which clearly do pollute the environment, they clearly do put particulate matter out into the environment. They do put all types of NOx and SOx and CO2. And obviously, some people are more concerned about CO2 than others. We're not necessarily here to debate that per se, but that's the idea behind electrification: is can we improve air quality, water quality by having appliances in homes that don't burn fuels and therefore put these pollutants out into the environment, and then hopefully the grid gets more clean over time and we will have basically free and clean electricity. It sounds great. Sign me up. It sounds great. I love the idea of electrification. We've talked a lot about electrification and the reality of it here on the BERcast, several episodes talking about, is this for real? Are we prepared? Is the rank and file contractor prepared? Is the rank and file homeowner prepared? The rank and file builder, are they prepared? Because if we get it wrong, man, it costs a lot and it can really turn off everybody from doing this in the future. Tony, tell me a little bit about your business, and then what are you hearing about this new code, and what do you think about this whole prospect of the all electric energy code?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I met Uriah way back in 2010 because of the contractor I was working for. I was a project manager. We started doing Energy Star ratings, and Bear was the provider for our HERS rater. I met him a long time ago, and he was from North Creek, like you said, up north. It's further north than not where I live, but I'm a builder of 38 years. My father was a builder. I was a builder. Like I said, I eventually left my dad. I was with him for a while, had my own business, and I went to work for a tract builder. I was there for 18 years, and 15 of them we did Energy Star houses. And I really enjoyed talking to the engineer. He was an engineer that left GE, and he was a HERS rater. And I would always be very curious about what he was doing, what was going on, and he would explain it to me. And so the more I saw him, and later on as we progressed building houses, he told me he was going to leave doing this totally. He wanted to retire. And I was like, wow, this is a great opportunity for me. I really would love to learn more about HERS Radar, and I did some research on it. And so I decided to do the online classes, which I did. And then I did the training with actually, it was Uriah and Tom West out in Massachusetts. And that's where I met both of them. It was a great training, learned a lot. And Uriah was a great teacher. So I decided to go with the Bear. And then since then, last 5 years, been a HERS Raider. I really enjoy it. I actually left the building business pretty much full time for almost 5 years ago now and started doing this full time. And I still build one house a year now. I'm still a builder. So I like to build things. It's been in my blood. But I've really enjoyed the HERS rating part of it. Builders in the area, let's talk about the builders. A lot of them, they're just not prepared for this. They're not. In my area, they think this is something that's going to go away. Basically, we have this pause for 120 days. That's tentatively what they said, but they think it's going to go away. And I said, no, it's here to stay. I said, it's going to eventually happen. I don't know about the time frame, but this will happen. There's a small portion of them, and I'm lucky. I have a few that I do Energy Star ratings for that they're like, this is what the future is going to be. We're going to end up going electric. So they're more prepared, which is good. But most of the builders, they think that this is crazy. And I say, why do you think it's crazy? The grid's not going to handle it, whatever. And that's probably the biggest, I would think, in the industry that people talk about the grid itself. It's old. They talked about the last time they really upgraded the grid was 40 years ago. We have plants that are throughout New York State that are 80 years old, hydroelectric plants. It's just, they talk about making it in bigger and better. We got to fix what we have now, I think. And implementation of a lot of these wind farms, solar farms that they're talking about doing, I think it's a great idea, but it's going to take a long time. It's not going to happen overnight. This has to be something that's going to be into 2035 until we're ready to go over, in my opinion, to all electric. I don't think we're ready for it yet.
Yeah, fair enough. And it's tough for me because I'm going to admit, I'm going to raise my hand. I'm not ashamed. I am an environmentalist. I believe that we need and deserve and should have cleaner air and cleaner water and cleaner food. I'm not ashamed to say that. I think it's a common sense thing that all humans should want. Our health can be impacted by our environment. I live here in Detroit, Michigan, and it's unfortunately one of the more polluted places on earth. We have bad air quality, and it affects a lot of people who grow up in leaky old homes and potentially with fossil fuel appliances that are not really operating up to snuff. I get it. I get the vision of success of electrification. And so I'm the last person to say absolutely not. Keep drilling and keep burning fuels, keep digging more coal. I'm the last person to say that. But at the same time, I think that to your point, Tony, and this time, what you just said about is the grid really ready for it? Are we really, if we go all electric, are we going to get cleaner water and cleaner air? Or are we going back to a former commentator on the BERcast, Bryn Cooksey? He brought up some people believe that we're just moving the smokestack. You make the house all electric, but then you got to burn more fuel at the power plant in order to make up for it. And maybe you improve localized air quality, but you maybe, for anybody who lives next to a power plant, you make it worse. I definitely think that there is some sense there. Again, I brought on Tony here because he's up from, I call it outstate or upstate. The thing with upstate New York is basically anywhere that's north of the city could be upstate, according to if you're from New York. And so that's not necessarily a good predictor, but he's from the northern part of the state. Yes, there is more to New York State than New York City. You might not realize that listening to national news and things like that, but the whole rest of the state is, it's not one size fits all from it's called an empire state. It's a big state. The Adirondacks have a bunch of mountains. It's alpine basically up there, and maybe not quite where Tony is, but still it's colder. It's climate zone 6 here basically, or at least the northern parts here of climate zone 5. You got Western New York. So you got some decent Rust Belt, Great Lakes kind of cities like Rochester and Buffalo and Syracuse. I have a family connection out here in Chautauqua, New York, over on the far western flank of New York State, and then got Long Island again, which is the rare part of climate zone 4 basically in the state. And so it's not a one size fits all area, very rural for most of the state, and the political inclinations, they're not what you might think of when nationally we talk about New York politics per se. I wanted to get Tony on here because this perspective of can the grid handle it, I guess I'm somewhat satisfied to hear that at least builders are saying they're concerned about it from a grid perspective and they're not just entirely poo-pooing it from an environmental perspective. You being a builder and now being a HERS rater, what's your take? Do you think that, the grid aside, just getting it into the hands of contractors and builders, would January 1st, 2026, would everybody be ready to go for an all electric future? Or do you think things would just grind to a halt out of a lack of familiarity?
Again, I think a lot of these builders were hoping and praying for a pause or this was going to be delayed. And that was their general consensus. I don't know. I think builders' mentality, I've worked for and do a lot of HERS rating and also blower door tests for a numerous number of builders in the area, about 30 different ones. And it's all about the bottom line. That's basically, they're in business for that, but there's very few of them that really, if it's going to cost more money to implement some of the codes, which it always does, every code change, it costs more money. The affordability of housing goes up. So people down in, when it comes to affordable housing, it puts them out of the range to afford a house nowadays. I look at my kids. I'm very fortunate. I have 3 kids. They all have houses and they're in their early 30s. So that's unheard of in some parts of our state.
Well, Papa.
Yeah, yep. Well, that's a good thing. But going back to the builders again, and I just think that they don't understand or want to understand that this is going to happen some way, somehow. And again, I think it's about money. They look at the fact that, okay, now we got to increase our insulation in the wall. Are we going to go continuous on the outside? What are we going to do? We're going to do blown in insulation. Are we going to do closed cell, open cell? What are we going to do? Different builders ask me different things, different scenarios, like Mike was talking about. I took the 2024 code too and was looking at different scenarios at modeling. I have one client who does modular homes, and they're looking at, they need to achieve Energy Star 3.2. In order to do that, there's a lot more involved than to make the house pass or the modular pass. And again, like you were talking about, we don't have our software out because he goes, you got to give me some scenarios. You got to let me know. And this is the best I can do right now. Again, I know transitions are always not perfect, but I don't know. I think that's what builders, they're looking at that too. Even the res check, someone that they use res check, that's not available yet for them.
Yeah, I will say, I'll just make a plug that if you're in anywhere in New York State other than Climate Zone 4, go ahead and at least use res check online for the 2024 IECC module, or you could use Ecotrope that does have 2024 in it. RemRate not yet, but if you're an Ecotrope user, you can use 2024, and that basically, for all intents and purposes, is the same code that you would need to implement for outstate, we'll call it, all the rest of New York State, Climate Zone 5 and 6, because the values within the code tables really did not change. If you're like Michael and you're on Long Island, it doesn't help you that much. But I guess, so what I'm hearing from you, Tony, is that you think that this is the reality, is that the state is committed, as is much of the Northeast, to an all electric clean energy future. And again, I'm gonna clap for that. I know it's now taboo to believe in environmentalism or pollution prevention or anything like that. You can barely say those words without people wanting to throw rotten tomatoes at you nowadays. But the reality is that these things do matter, and I think it is responsible to want to promote that long term. The silver lining I'm going to take out of this, Tony, is from what you're saying is maybe the pause temporarily on the electrification law, it will at least allow the builders to get caught up with the code itself. Because I'll say the one weird thing about this is that the code itself doesn't actually say that you have to ban fossil fuels, which is odd. There's like a separate law that says that you can't have fossil fuels, but it doesn't actually say it in the energy code itself. So I think there's an opportunity here that, let's just say it takes 6 more months or maybe even a year in order to sort out, and maybe in fact the state does choose to go all electric by, let's just say, 2027 for new construction. Maybe there's an opportunity that we can get people up to speed with the 2024 code and how to implement it, and then the mechanical changes are maybe the next step opportunity. Because I'm going to make a push here for those who aren't familiar with energy codes at very deep levels. I've done my own kind of deep dive. I'm going to call it cracking the code. Chris Mack, cracking the code on the 2024 code. And my heads up is the path of least resistance, in my experience, is going to be the performance path, the R405 simulated performance path, especially if you are working with a builder that is willing to make the building substantially airtight with balanced energy recovery ventilation. If you are working with a builder that's willing to do those two things, there is actually very significant and palpable savings in the performance methodology when you combine air tightness and mechanical ventilation that can potentially reduce some of the complexity of the building enclosure elements that come out of the prescriptive code. Now, I don't say that to discourage people to do prescriptive. I think better building enclosures is very important. And I appreciate it when builders spend extra time and money to make better insulated buildings. But not every builder wants to do it. Tony, with your builders, how many of them are using continuous insulation on their above grade walls as just the standard? What percentage? 50%, 100%, 0%?
0%.
0%. Okay, so 0% are using continuous above grade wall insulation. What about you, Michael? How many of your builders are using continuous above grade wall insulation?
Unless they don't have to, I would say it's probably about 15%,
15%.
that are
Okay,
using it.
15%
Yeah,
are. Okay,
are
so
using it.
this is an important thing, right? Because looking at the code and we look at the R values here, but for all intents and purposes, walls have to have continuous insulation prescriptively. Now, again, you can use what used to be called the UA trade-off. Now it's called the thermal conductance trade-off. And so you might be able to do things like better windows. You're not going to get a lot of savings out of ceilings. You might, but R49 is already quite a bit of insulation. Basement walls, R15 continuous, you're probably not going to get a lot out of there either. So from a thermal conductance standpoint, it's going to be hard to trade off that R20 plus 5. Let's just say that most people are using 2x6s and they're used to doing some form of just cavity only insulation in a 2x6. It's going to be hard. They're either going to have to go to a fully applied high density foam package in the cavity, which is not inexpensive, or they're going to have to get used to continuous insulation, or like I'm saying, they could go over to the performance path. The reason why the performance path is maybe going to work a little bit better is that in New York State's climate zones, basically again, it was called the UA value. Now it's called thermal conductance. It's basically the same thing. Let's just call it the UA for familiarity. Basically, your as proposed home, your home to be built, can have a UA that is 15% worse than the reference home. And so that allows for potentially trading off elements of the building enclosure in order to basically not have to do things like continuous insulation. Again, folks, don't shoot me. My passive house friends are all saying, don't tell them that they don't have to have continuous insulation. But that's the reality, folks, is if you use a performance methodology, could be R405, It could be R406, the ERI compliance option. I think that's another good one to look at. The scores are, I think, not that challenging, especially in New York State. The low 50s, that's not impossible to get to. Another kind of thing I think a lot of people missed, but we had talked about it before, was in chapter 1. There is an opportunity for using above code programs. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. Above. Maybe New York State got rid of that now that I think about it. But there was an option for potentially more restrictive codes. And in the 2024 itself, there was an option to use above code programs like an Energy Star Homes potentially as a trade-off mechanism, although I'm not seeing it here specifically in New York's version of it. So anyways, regardless, doesn't really matter. It's going to be a new day. It's going to be something more challenging. As if you just want a good cheat sheet, fact sheet, go to Michael's website, energytestingservices.com, because they really honestly, they have it broken down really nimbly here. Michael, passing the mic back to you. What about your builders? I understand you're saying builders don't like to change. They don't like to do anything new. They don't like to spend any more money. I agree with all that. It's pretty true for most builders, I'd say. Obviously, there are some builders that are cutting edge, and they've already been building like this for a while. And so honestly, it's not a big deal for them if the code changes or not, because they already believe in high performance building. For you push people towards prescriptive path usually. How do you think that's going to go over potentially with needing to do continuous insulation, or were you going to push people towards fully insulated high density foam walls? What were you kind of leaning towards?
So leaning towards would be incorporating more continuous insulation. I'm personally a big fan of it. I love to see it, and I think that it's one of the more overlooked parts of an assembly. Exterior continuous insulation to me is like a big jacket that you put on around a house.
Absolutely.
And it's your first line of defense when breaking your thermal bridging and doing all that. I think it's very important, and I think the code gives a lot of emphasis on it. And I like that for that aspect. Like you said, for the handful of builders that I do have, because there are guys that are out east, for example, that have been tailored to this way, because we also have on top of the state, the IECC code, we're following the stretch code. So some townships are following the New York State stretch code, which already has a lot of these upgraded provisions. So for those guys, I don't think they're going to feel it as much, but you're right. For the general builder that is trying to count every dollar, cross every T, dot every I, possibly exploring the ERI options where more flexibility, it might be more realistic, because Tony was saying cost is such a huge factor at the end of the day. Everybody says the same, what's the least expensive way that we can get through this? And I always try to make people aware of their options, of course, because that's our job. But I feel like I always have to explain, listen, least expensive does not mean best performance. It doesn't always give you the best result.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, I think it's great if you push your builders towards continuous insulation, and they may even get some trade-off savings here too. You can back down to a 2x4 wall, for example. If you were used to doing 2x6, save a little bit in your lumber package and just have basically R10 on the outside plus R13 in cavity. Or you could even go to zero cavity insulation and all continuous. That would be pretty radical. Folks aren't necessarily used to building like that, but it's called outsolation. And the value there is you don't have any risk of moisture in the walls from condensation or dew point. And then you've got wide open cavities for your trades to be able to work in. We don't have to worry about insulation grading really so much, because if you just wrap the home in foam board or mineral wool or some other kind of outboard insulation, you can potentially really bypass that step. I don't know, Michael, you're tied in with insulation in that world. Do you think that's an option for anybody, or do you think that's a little bit too radical?
I think it's a little radical, to be honest. I think you'd scare a lot of people if you said, hey, you could put it all on the outside and take it away from the cavity. I don't know how well that would go over, especially coming from me. Yeah, not all the time. When I got started in the industry, I was 20 when I met you. When you and Uriah did my training, it was hard for builders to take guidance from me. now being 29, I know to grow my facial hair a little bit more when I'm in the field. I know how I got to do the lingo. So maybe it would go over better then, but I think that point might not be well received.
Yeah, it comes down to the devil in the details, how to execute it. Obviously, the builder is going to understand, how do I basically frame out my windows? And I would just say it's a big opportunity for whoever decides to lean into this, because cavity insulation, that's a whole other work scope you could potentially eliminate. And I'm not saying that to put anybody out of business, but cavity insulation, it's a cost by itself. And hey, if you could do one pass over the exterior of the building and be done, and you're able to work it out with your framing and window installation crews, it could actually work. Obviously, there's devils in the details. You got to figure out how to support the siding and things like that. But anyways, regardless, it is an option. Again, I'm going to encourage people to really kick the tires on the performance methods. If you've got a builder that just cannot potentially wrap their head around continuous insulation, R405 is going to be your friend, but there's no free lunches. Just so anybody knows, they may just say, oh, Chris, you're trying to push people towards the path of least resistance. My job is to be educated on what that is. Obviously, I would prefer that every home in New York State is a passive house starting next year, but I don't get to make that decision. And I know that's not going to happen, even if I wish it to be true. The reality is, even if you go for a performance methodology, there are no free lunches. You're not going to get any freebies. You're going to have to do something. Going back to the electrification element, or the fossil fuel ban, Michael, Long Island has been one of these areas that's still held on to boilers and things like that. And even like oil and things like that are still sometimes used in new construction. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're completely right. There's still a lot of projects, I would say middle of the island, that use oil. A lot of homes.
And Tony, what about in your area? Are people using oil sometimes still, or probably more propane, or is natural gas service enough where that's still predominant?
Majority of it, I'd say 90-95% is either gas or propane.
But regardless, so like on the island, people are still using 86% oil boilers and stuff like that. And the idea that we're going to go to all electric, that's going to be a big culture shift. People are going to have to get used to that. Michael, do you think that the HVAC contractors and the architects and the builders, are they prepared for that? Are they prepared, regardless of the politics, regardless of environmentalism, regardless of the grid? Are they prepared to do all electrification in homes?
I don't believe so. Not at this point. Like Tony was saying, and it rings true, that a lot of guys, a lot of builders, architects, HVAC contractors, from feedback I've received, is that they've hoped and fingers crossed that it was going to go away. So that's been my experience with a lot of their comebacks, a lot of the position, the rebuttals, is that I don't believe so. I don't believe that they would be ready. And I think that shifting gears a little bit, but eliminating choices for a builder when it comes to fuel sources and eliminating options for how they want to do a system design. I think that the law was well intentioned, but I don't believe that the follow through is going to be I don't believe that the follow through would be there. And I think that's the most important part. You could write it into law, but if the follow through isn't true to it, I feel like it flops at that point, and it could do more harm than good. And that's my concern with it.
Fair enough. Yeah. So, number one, I think your read on the situation is probably right. I don't think that most contractors are ready to start specifying air to water heat pumps or all geothermal so that people can still get their in-floor radiant heat, but to get it with an all electric source. I don't think that people are prepared for that. I think you're right. Or to move to all air source heat pumps with ducted distribution. I don't know that on Long Island, or really just about anywhere, maybe places like, maybe the city is maybe a little bit more prepared. Again, Hudson Valley, Catskills region, maybe even some places like Buffalo and Rochester that have made a little bit more progress here in terms of looking at the higher level building performance. And I don't know, on a whole state level, I think it's going to be a tough lift. And the thing you hit on about cost to the builder and choice, here's what I'll say. Choice, I think that's it gets into sort of a philosophical or political issue. And I think I think that cuts both ways, right? Should we have a choice to continue to do something that's probably really harming society in the long run? I don't know. I don't know if we should have that choice. Are we framing the conversation appropriately? I will also say that there's some sneaky cost benefits if builders get smart. If you don't have to run gas pipe to your house or all the other venting mechanisms that come with fossil fuel, there's some savings actually. It could actually cost you less to build a home all electric than if you were to do it conventionally with a fossil fuel system. What I'm still concerned about is this. I'm still concerned about this costs, the cost of electricity. And so even if the builder can break even on it, and sell their house, what's being left over for the consumer? And, it's funny when I got involved in this industry. Yeah, I did it partially because I'll out myself. I am a greenie weenie. I want to do the right thing by the environment. But it wasn't just about that. There was also this promise of energy savings. You can save people money. And let's be honest, consumers, the average American is stretched. Our budgets are stretched. Things just cost more money, and so I'm excited about this, the back to that narrative, right? We can sell efficiency regardless of your politics, regardless of what your environmentalist creds are. We can sell it because you're going to save money for people. And it's worth doing for that reason. And oh, by the way, you get a more comfortable home out of it as a byproduct of saving money as well. That sounds like a no brainer. I would think almost everybody wants to do that. But if you go to all electric, and there's this thing called the spark gap. What's the ratio of BTU, the cost per BTU for gas versus the cost per BTU of electricity? And what is that in reality? I didn't do that math. I probably should have. I'm a bad host. I should have done that ahead of time. That would have been really killer if I had all that lined up. But maybe we'll do it in a little bit of a post profiling here. But regardless, like here in Michigan, electricity's gone up about 30%. The cost of electricity to natural gas is 6 times per BTU when you convert kilowatt hour or watt hours rather to BTUs per hour. Basically, it is 6 times the cost. And the best in class heat pumps are like a COP of 3. So that means that compared to my 95% furnace, which is almost a COP of 1, it's 2.5 to 3 times as much cost to operate a home with a heat pump compared to a good gas furnace. So to me, it's been hard here in Michigan to recommend electrification because I know that people are going to be sticker shocked. I have a home builder colleague of mine based in Ann Arbor, which is a very greeny weeny place in Michigan, very University of Michigan and intellectual and research and environmental and blah, blah, blah. And so he's a green builder. He builds passive houses for other people. He did all electric on his own house and he was shocked. His bills were like $450 a month in the winter because electricity is expensive. Now, he didn't necessarily build all the way to a passive house, and he probably should have because he knows how to do it, and it probably would have saved him in the long run. But regardless, that's the thing that I'm a little bit worried about. Tony, again, you're from a part of the state where there's some well-to-do people up in the northern part of the state, a lot of sort of retirement homes and getting up near the mountains and things like that. But there's also just a lot of regular folk up where you live. Are you concerned at all about the potential cost of implementation of electrification in terms of people's bills?
For sure. Like you said, just with this upcoming electrification law that passed, in the past 2 years since it passed, my electric bill has progressively gone up. Like you said, 30% or more. And a lot of it has to do with because they know these companies, National Grid, any of them, they have to upgrade everything. They have to upgrade, they have to bring these other sources offline, nuclear plants, all that. So they have to replace them all. So they had to start charging us more already, which they have. You talk about a cost. Last year I did a project for somebody. They needed an Energy Star rating of 4 houses. They had some sort of grant, and they were all heat pumps. And they were in Keene, New York, which is past Lake Placid. So that's way up there. So there were small Cape Cod houses, unfinished upstairs, just downstairs. It was 800 square feet. During the winter, this is after the winter, I did HERS rating and also Energy Star for them. It was $800 a month to run these little 800 square foot houses when we had the cold snap last winter.
$800 a month. Good Lord, that's a lot of
Yes.
money.
Yes.
Wow.
That's a car payment. It's a car payment for some people.
Yeah, now that's insane. To me, that's what gets me concerned, because you know what that tells me? No, Tony, you didn't do the HVAC design on it, did you? Did somebody else do it?
Oh no! I told them it was a retired architect.
Throw the person under the bus who did the HVAC design, because what it told me is that they probably didn't know how to do it, and they probably specified oversized equipment, potentially with electric resistance backup, probably
yes, they did.
with an
That's exactly what they
inappropriate
did.
switchover temperature, so that basically they were treating it like an old heat pump from 20 years ago.
Yeah, from 30 years ago.
Yeah. All right. So
It's
basically, did I nail it,
what
Tony?
they did.
Did I profile it correct?
No, you did exactly, because it's the first thing I said to them. I said, this isn't sized correctly. And the guy that was overseeing the project was a retired architect. And he didn't even bother to look at any of the HVAC specs or anything like that. And that's the first thing I asked for before they even started the project. He says, "Oh, we have that all taken care of." So I didn't model anything. I didn't do anything like that for them. So it was crazy.
Yeah, and so this is the thing, people. This is the thing that gets me nervous about this. Again, I'm a believer that there's value potentially there to the idea behind the law, but it's all about implementation, because, folks, I've said it before, heat pumps are not magic boxes. You don't just get to throw it in and then it's magically going to make the environment better. It doesn't work like that. It could make the environment better if it's done. And I want to give a pitch to say it can be done right. I know it can, and it is being done right in the state of New York. Tony Lasanti, who wasn't able to be on here because of connectivity issues, he does a lot of very progressive passive house type of work in Hudson Valley area. We've got clients, John Finewood and Matt Bowers over in Rochester area, that are really pushing passive house. Matt Bowers lives in a passive house and has since 2016. He doesn't even turn on his heat at all until November most years, or maybe even later than that, depending on how cold it gets. Why? Because his passive house conserves heat so well that it basically practically takes care of itself. So he runs on a heat pump. I've been to his house. I know he's not getting totally killed by energy bills, but he did a lot of the detail-oriented stuff, the continuous insulation that Michael was talking about being so important, the air tightness that I talked about being so important, the having really good ventilation. He has all that in his homes. He has better windows. And the 2025 New York State Code, don't get me wrong, it's a big step forward, but it's not necessarily going to get you a passive house to the point where you don't really have to turn the heat on at all. So it does make me nervous that people are going to get heat pumps that are oversized, and they weren't selected for cold climate conditions. They potentially have electric resistance backup heat installed with an inappropriate thermostatic switchover temperature, and potentially other issues. Undersized ductwork that leaks, having refrigerant charge that's inappropriate, a lot of other things that can really affect the performance of the heat pump. Another pitch I'm going to give here for those that are pursuing the New York State Energy Code is following the ERI method. If you go ERI, another thing to consider here, and again, I'm not pushing anybody against prescriptive. I think the prescriptive is great. But another thing to consider here is if you go ERI, There's something that we've talked about before here on the BERcast. Our good friends from Burgess and from 10WW, we talked about the reality of HVAC grading. The ResNet ACA Standard 310 is the HVAC grading standard for the industry. And it allows for people to be able to take a more detail-oriented review of the installation of HVAC, the design, the duct testing to make sure that the ducts are tight, the blower fan airflow performance and watt draw, as well as a refrigerant charge review. And then you get credit for it. And I will just say that if you're in a cold climate and you specify a heat pump and you get a grade 1 HVAC grading, man, you crush the HERS index. You can get like 6, 8 points, maybe even more, maybe even like 10 points on the HERS index if you do HVAC grading. So that's just a pitch here to my HERS raters who are listening, that if you right now in New York State, we're not necessarily going to move all electric immediately, but we know we're probably going to get there. That's what Tony's saying here, and I'm inclined to agree with him. It's probably going to happen at some point. So why not get people prepared now to comply with the code, but to get electrification? Because what I've heard from both these gentlemen is that the builders are just hoping it all goes away. They're not getting prepared. They're not working with their contractors to evaluate heat pumps and how to make them work. They're just dreaming of a day where we don't ever have to think about it again. And like Tony is suggesting, that's probably not going to work long term. Michael, what do you think? You think it's all just going to go away, or do you think it's probably going to become a reality at some point?
No, I totally agree with Tony. I think it is the reality. I think that it will be the reality for everybody.
Yeah. So folks, get prepared. Start running some scenarios with your builders on, and I'm just going to push it. I'm just going to say, go ERI. And it's not just because I'm a HERS provider or on the ResNet board and I want more HERS ratings to be out there. I'm going to suggest that you push this, because if they are going to have to be all electric eventually, help them get it right now. Start working with them today. Get their HVAC design tight. Evaluate the install quality. Evaluate the total duct leakage. Evaluate the airflow performance, because what would be the worst case scenario is if we get it wrong and we've got really high electric bills, and then consumers are suffering, and then they're calling their state reps and saying, kill this thing and don't ever bring it back. Because if you believe in the value of electrification, or at least the concept of it at some point, if we get it wrong now, we will kill it forever, quite possibly. So I'm encouraging y'all, kick the tires on R405, kick the tires on ERI, kick the tires on doing HVAC grading, and help your builders do it now. Because if they wait until it actually becomes law, they're going to get it wrong. And then guess what? They're also going to come and blame the HERS rater, right? Because when there's high energy bills and people aren't happy, they're going to assume that we did something wrong. So let's get ahead of that issue right there. Tony, any final thoughts here from you on this episode of the BERcast? Looking forward to the 2025 New York Energy Code or electrification future?
Oh, just thank you for letting me be a part of this again. And it was nice to have Michael there too and his perspective. It's all about education. And I really believe that. I went to college to be an industrial arts teacher, and that's what I was for 3 years. And then I decided to go to work for my dad. And I loved teaching, but I also loved building. But I think these builders really need to be taught. And some communities in our area, when there's a big code change, they do put on seminars and updates, which are good. Queensbury's done that the last time there was a big code change. But a lot of these municipalities, they don't educate, or the building departments, they're like, it's not my problem. But I know as a HERS rater, I enjoy doing that with different builders. I just enjoy it. And we're talking about all this energy, different things here, but I have builders that still don't understand how to air seal correctly. I said, I'll come out, I'll show you. And these basic principles that we need to do, and they just don't get it. They think about stuffing insulation. I said, you don't stuff anything in. It's just things like that. It's education, and I think that's important.
Yeah, you raise a good point. We're really far away from getting to the point where electrification is like a no-brainer because we have builders that are just they lack education, code officials too. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of raising everybody's level of professionalism to really get this right. Michael, what do you think? Final thoughts, buddy?
Completely agree. Education is the path forward, and rising tides raises all boats. And if we're all in the same playing field, I think that's truly the way that we all move forward in the right direction. And to also add on to education, educating the building departments too. Sometimes what I notice in our area is it's almost like they talk different languages and they could be bordering towns. And I think having uniformity, education, uniformity, and consistency is what makes it easier for the builders. If you have a guy building in one town and he's got to play by one set of rules, and then he goes to the other town and plays on a different set of rules, they'll turn and say, what way am I supposed to do it? And I think consistency is a big thing that gets overlooked a lot. And I just hope that with this new code cycle and this new code change that gets implemented, that it's a new opportunity for everybody to get on the same playing field.
Couldn't agree more. This is a call to action here, all my New York State folks. And I know a lot of you all listening, you're not from New York State. You don't do business there. It's not a big deal to you. This happens to be for all of you all because we're moving in this direction of better energy codes and having more universal knowledge of how to get it right. And us as energy raters being that asset to be able to help get it right is just so critical. So I want to thank both Tony and Michael for being my guests today on another edition of the BERcast. We're going to sign off for now. We'll probably check out on this topic maybe later in 2026 when we know more about where the law is heading. But for now, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Happy holidays to all. And we'll be back next month for another episode of the BERcast. Talk to you then.